Imagine your own family stealing everything you worked for while you're fighting for your life in a coma. That's exactly what happened to me when my sister pushed me down the stairs and tried to steal my $13 million AI contract. But when I walked into that Phoenix courtroom on crutches, with the woman who saved my life beside me, my parents' faces went white as sheets. They thought they had buried my future in that hospital bed where they abandoned me. They were dead wrong. If your own family betrayed you like this, would you destroy them in court or give them one last chance? Comment below, because this story will change how you see family forever. I'm Madison Sterling, and at 28 years old, I thought I had finally made it. Walking out of that gleaming Phoenix office tower, my hands were literally shaking as I clutched the signed contract that would change everything. $13 million, that's what my revolutionary AI algorithm for medical diagnostics had just earned me from the biggest healthcare corporation in Arizona. Years of sleepless nights, endless coding sessions, and pushing through every doubt had finally paid off in the most spectacular way possible. I was a software engineer at the absolute peak of my game, and all I could think about was rushing home to share this incredible news with my family. My heart was racing with pure pride as I imagined their faces lighting up with joy and amazement. But as I drove through the tree-lined streets of our upscale Scottsdale neighborhood in my brand new Mercedes-AMG GT 63S, something felt different about the familiar route home. The desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, but there was an unsettling tension in the air that I couldn't quite shake. I kept telling myself it was just nerves, just the overwhelming excitement of finally achieving something this massive after years of being overlooked by my family. My sister Victoria had always been the golden child, the one who got all the praise and attention, while I fought for scraps of approval. But today was going to be different. Today, they would finally see what I was truly capable of achieving on my own. When I stepped through the front door of our modern suburban home, the atmosphere immediately felt charged with something I couldn't identify. Victoria was sitting at our granite kitchen island, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the surface. Her eyes narrowed in a way that made my stomach clench with sudden unease. She was 32, a project manager at my company, always impeccably dressed and completely in control of every situation she encountered. But that afternoon, something was fundamentally wrong with the picture. Her usual composed mask had slipped, revealing something dark and calculating underneath. The way she looked at me wasn't the warm welcome I'd been hoping for. I held up the contract with a grin that felt forced now, my voice cracking slightly as I announced, "I did it, Victoria. $13 million for my algorithm. Can you believe it?" Her lips twitched, but it wasn't into the smile I desperately wanted to see. Instead, it was a grimace that sent ice through my veins, a look of pure contempt that I'd never seen directed at me before. "Your algorithm," she snapped, her voice dripping with the venom that made me step backward instinctively. "You mean the one I've been overseeing for months? The one I personally pushed through countless corporate meetings and presentations?" The words hit me like physical blows, and I felt my world beginning to tilt off its axis. I'd always known Victoria was competitive. It was written into her DNA from the time we were children. She'd always been the star, the one who effortlessly commanded our parents' attention and praise while I scraped and clawed for any recognition whatsoever. But this was something entirely different, something that felt dangerous and predatory, in a way that made my skin crawl. This wasn't just sibling rivalry anymore. This was pure, unadulterated rage mixed with something that looked disturbingly like calculation. I tried desperately to explain that the algorithm was entirely my creation, built from my code, my sleepless nights, my breakthrough moments, but she wasn't listening to reason anymore. She stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the tile floor with a sound like nails on a chalkboard, and stepped closer to me with predatory grace. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" she hissed, her face inches from mine, her breath hot with fury. I backed away instinctively, my hands raised in a defensive gesture, trying desperately to calm the situation before it spiraled completely out of control. "This isn't about competition, Victoria," I said, my voice shaking with fear and confusion. But she was beyond listening now, beyond reasoning, her eyes blazing with the fury that seemed to consume everything rational about her. We'd somehow moved to the top of our curved staircase during our argument, and I realized with growing horror that we were dangerously close to the edge, with nothing but empty air and hardwood floors below us. "You're nothing without me," Victoria spat with such vicious intensity that I actually flinched. And then, in a flash that seemed to happen in slow motion, her hands shot out and shoved my shoulders with surprising force. I stumbled backward, my foot catching nothing but air, as I realized with crystal clarity that I was falling. The world spun around me in a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes as my body crashed down the wooden steps. Each impact sending explosions of pain through my skull and spine. The last thing I remembered was the sound of my own scream echoing through our house. And then everything went black as unconsciousness claimed me completely. When I finally opened my eyes, I was lying in a sterile hospital bed at Suntech Medical Center, surrounded by the constant beeping of machines and the antiseptic smell that seemed to cling to everything. My head felt like it had been split open with an axe. My left leg throbbed with a pain so intense it made me nauseous, and a nurse's gentle voice cut through the fog of confusion that clouded my thoughts. "You're awake," she said softly, her eyes kind but guarded in a way that immediately put me on edge. I blinked repeatedly, trying to piece together the fragments of memory that seemed to float just out of reach, like trying to catch smoke with my bare hands. "How long?" I croaked, my throat raw and scratchy from the breathing tube that had recently been removed. "2 weeks," she replied, her expression growing more serious. "You've been in a coma for 2 weeks, honey. We weren't sure if you were going to wake up." The words hit me like a freight train, and I felt the room spinning around me as the reality of my situation began to sink in. 2 weeks of my life, gone without a trace. 2 weeks where anything could have happened to my contract, my algorithm, my entire future. I immediately asked about my family, expecting to hear that they'd been camping out in the waiting room, worried sick about my condition. The nurse hesitated in a way that made my heart sink, then said carefully, "No one's been here to see you. Dear, your parents called once early on to check your status, but they haven't visited or called back since then." My chest tightened with a pain that had nothing to do with my physical injuries, a crushing weight that made it difficult to breathe. I'd expected Victoria to stay away after what she'd done. Pushing me down those stairs was attempted murder, after all, but my parents. I thought of my father, always distant and emotionally unavailable, and my mother, who had spent my entire childhood making it clear that Victoria was her favorite daughter, while I was just an afterthought. "Did they say anything about why they weren't coming?" I asked, dreading the answer but needing to know the truth. The nurse looked away uncomfortably, clearly not wanting to be the bearer of such devastating news. "They said you brought this situation on yourself," she said quietly, "and that you had shamed the family name with your reckless behavior." I lay there staring at the acoustic tiles on the ceiling, the words cutting deeper than Victoria's physical assault had, deeper than any of my broken bones or bruised organs. My own parents, the people who should have been at my bedside praying for my recovery, had dismissed me like I was nothing more than an embarrassment to be hidden away. I thought back to the contract signing, my moment of absolute triumph now completely tainted by Victoria's jealousy and violence. She hadn't just pushed me down the stairs in a moment of rage, she'd tried to systematically erase me from existence, to remove me as an obstacle to whatever twisted plan she had brewing in her calculating mind. And my parents, the people who should have been my safety net, my support system, my advocates, had turned their backs on me in my darkest hour. I clenched my fists until my knuckles turned white, feeling the pain in my body was nothing compared to the betrayal that was slowly poisoning my heart. This wasn't just abandonment, this was something much more sinister, and I was beginning to realize that my fall down those stairs might not have been the end of Victoria's plan, but just the beginning. As the days crawled by with agonizing slowness, my isolation grew heavier and more oppressive with each passing hour. The hospital room felt like a prison cell, its sterile white walls closing in around me as I lay there, my body aching from injuries that seemed to hurt worse with each passing day. Not a single member of my family showed up to check on my condition, or even called to see how I was doing. I kept glancing at the door, hoping beyond hope that someone who cared about me would walk through it. But it remained stubbornly closed, a barrier between me and the world that seemed to have forgotten I existed. The nurses moved quietly through their routines, their professional compassion a poor substitute for the family love I desperately craved. And I was left alone with my thoughts, replaying the sting of betrayal over and over again, until it felt like an infected wound that wouldn't heal. One morning, Victoria appeared in my doorway without any warning, like a venomous snake slithering into my sanctuary. She stood at the edge of my bed with her arms folded across her chest, a smirk twisting her perfectly made-up face into something ugly and cruel. "Still clinging to life, huh?" she said, her voice sharp and cold as winter wind. "You're really holding everyone back, you know. The family would be so much better off if you'd just given up." Pain flared through my injured leg as I tried to shift position, glaring at her with all the hatred I could muster through my exhaustion and medication fog. "Why are you here, Victoria?" I asked, my throat tight with emotion and barely controlled rage. She leaned closer, her eyes glinting with malicious satisfaction, and whispered, "Just making sure you understand your place and stay out of my way from now on." Then she straightened up with a satisfied smile and walked out of the room, her expensive heels clicking against the linoleum floor with each deliberate step. Her words weren't just randomly cruel, they carried a weight and purpose that suggested she was guarding some terrible secret. I clenched the hospital bedsheets until my knuckles turned white, my anger simmering just below the surface, as I realized she wasn't just mocking my helpless condition. She was actively working on something that required me to remain powerless and isolated. Later that week, my best friend Sophia Mitchell slipped into the room like a guardian angel, her face drawn with worry and exhaustion from what looked like days of fighting bureaucratic red tape. She hugged me gently, being incredibly careful not to jostle my injuries, and sat beside my bed with tears streaming down her cheeks. "I've been fighting to see you for over a week," she said, her voice low and urgent. "The hospital kept turning me away, saying family only, and when I explained I was your emergency contact, they claimed they had no record of that designation." I felt a rush of relief at her presence, her genuine concern acting like a lifeline in this ocean of loneliness and abandonment that had become my world. Then she dropped a bomb that made my blood run cold. "Victoria's been making major moves at work," she said, her eyes narrowing with disgust. "She's been telling everyone who will listen that she's taking over your $13 million contract, acting like the entire algorithm was her brainchild from the very beginning." My stomach churned with nausea that had nothing to do with my medications as the implications hit me like a sledgehammer. My algorithm, the revolutionary breakthrough I'd built from scratch through years of painstaking work, was being systematically claimed by the very person who'd tried to murder me. Sophia's voice was tight with barely controlled fury as she continued. "She's been saying she's the visionary who made it all happen, and that you were just a junior programmer following her detailed instructions." The realization crashed over me like a tsunami of betrayal and rage. Victoria wasn't just gloating about my injuries or enjoying my family's abandonment. She was actively executing a carefully planned campaign to steal my entire life's work and legacy. This had been premeditated, calculated, and utterly ruthless in its execution. She'd pushed me down those stairs not in a moment of uncontrolled anger, but as the first step in a comprehensive plan to eliminate me as competition and claim everything I'd worked for as her own. The depth of her betrayal was so complete, so thoroughly evil, that I felt like I was drowning in the enormity of what she'd done to me. That night, I grabbed my phone with shaking fingers, wincing as I fumbled with the touchscreen that seemed impossibly difficult to navigate through my pain and medication haze. I needed to check my bank account desperately, hoping to access funds to cover mounting hospital costs and maybe regain some small measure of control over my rapidly deteriorating situation. The banking app loaded with agonizing slowness, and then a red alert flashed across the screen like a warning siren. "Account frozen, legal hold." My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples as panic set in completely. I called the bank immediately, my voice shaking as I tried to explain my situation to the customer service representative. Her words chilled me to the bone. "A court order has frozen your accounts," she said in a professionally neutral tone. "It cites serious concerns about your mental capacity and ability to manage your own financial affairs responsibly." The word capacity hit me like a physical blow. I'd just awakened from a medically induced coma, fighting every day to survive and recover. And someone was systematically trying to paint me as mentally incompetent and unfit to control my own life. Victoria's smug confidence during her hospital visit, combined with her brazen boasts at work about taking over my contract, suddenly clicked into place with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just abandonment by my family. This was a comprehensive conspiracy to destroy me completely. A week later, a distinguished stranger walked into my hospital room and introduced himself as Alexander Bennett, a lawyer in his 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm, authoritative voice that immediately commanded respect. He carried a thick folder under his arm, his expression deadly serious, as he sat in the chair beside my bed and placed the documents where I could see them. "I'm here about your contract and the legal issues surrounding your alleged incapacitation," he said, sliding a stack of official-looking papers toward me with careful precision. My heart raced as I scanned the documents, my eyes widening with each page as the full scope of the conspiracy against me became crystal clear. The papers were legal forms, officially stamped and notarized, declaring me mentally incapacitated and unable to manage my own personal and financial affairs. At the bottom of each document was what appeared to be my signature. But I'd never signed any of these papers. I'd been unconscious in a coma when they were supposedly executed. "These documents were filed to transfer your $13 million contract to your sister," Alexander said, his tone steady but grim with the implications. "Someone has orchestrated a comprehensive legal strategy to take everything you've worked for, and they've been remarkably thorough in their approach." I gripped the papers so tightly my knuckles turned white, my mind spinning as I tried to process the sheer audacity and criminal nature of what had been done to me. I asked Alexander how he'd found me, desperate to understand how anyone even knew I needed help. He explained that Sophia, my best friend and colleague at the company, had grown worried about my extended absence and hired him to investigate. When she couldn't get any information from my family or the hospital administration, the court order freezing your bank accounts was just the opening move, he said, flipping to another section of the legal documents. "These additional papers claim you're permanently unfit to work or make decisions based on supposedly detailed medical records that paint a picture of severe brain damage and cognitive impairment." I stared at him in complete disbelief, feeling like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. Alexander leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "We need to investigate this much more deeply, but from what I can see so far, this entire situation looks deliberately orchestrated by someone with access to your personal information and medical records." I nodded vigorously, my anger rising like a tide that threatened to sweep away everything in its path. Victoria wasn't just stealing my contract or trying to damage my reputation. She was attempting to completely erase my legal competence, my professional identity, and my fundamental right to control my own life. This was systematic character assassination on a scale that bordered on the sociopathic in its thoroughness and cruelty. That afternoon, Dr. Catherine Wells, the physician who'd overseen my medical care since the day I was admitted, came to see me with a deeply troubled expression on her face. She was a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and a reputation for absolute integrity, and she carried a tablet displaying my medical records with obvious reluctance. "I've discovered something extremely troubling during my review of your case," she said, pulling up my electronic chart with careful deliberation. "Your medical records were systematically altered after you were admitted to this hospital, and the changes were made by someone with administrative access to our computer systems." My breath caught in my throat as she pointed to specific entries on the screen, entries that showed extended sedation periods and exaggerated neurological deficits that bore no resemblance to my actual condition or recovery progress. "Someone deliberately added false information to make it appear that you would never wake up from your coma," she said, her eyes meeting mine with professional outrage. "These fabricated entries about permanent brain damage and cognitive impairment are exactly what enabled the court order to be processed so quickly and without proper oversight." I felt a chill run down my spine as the full implications became clear. This wasn't just about money or professional jealousy. This was about keeping me permanently out of the picture, erasing me from existence as completely as if I had actually died in that fall down the stairs. But the pieces of the conspiracy were starting to connect in my mind, like puzzle pieces forming a horrifying picture. Victoria had always been manipulative and controlling, but I was beginning to understand that her behavior went far beyond normal sibling rivalry into the realm of genuine psychopathy. I remembered her patterns from childhood, stealing my toys and convincing our parents I'd given them to her willingly, sabotaging my school projects and then comforting me while our parents praised her compassion, systematically undermining my confidence while presenting herself as the helpful older sister. Now she'd taken those same tactics and weaponized them into a criminal conspiracy designed to destroy me completely while stealing everything I'd worked to achieve. Determined to fight back against this systematic destruction of my life, I took a bold and potentially dangerous step. Still weak from my injuries but fueled by righteous anger and determination, I checked myself out of Suntec Medical Center, against medical advice, and arranged to meet Victoria at a quiet coffee shop in downtown Phoenix. I carefully tucked a small digital recorder in my jacket pocket, my heart pounding with anticipation and fear as I limped through the door on my crutches, knowing that this confrontation could either provide me with crucial evidence or put me in serious physical danger again. Victoria was already there, sipping an expensive latte with her posture relaxed and confident, but her eyes remained sharp and calculating as they tracked my movements across the room. "Well, look who's up and walking around," she said, her tone mockingly sweet with an underlying current of menace. "I honestly didn't think you'd make it out of that hospital bed alive." I forced myself to smile and play along with her game, asking casual questions about work and family, while internally steeling myself for what I needed to accomplish. Every word she spoke was being recorded. Every admission of guilt was being permanently documented for future use in court. She leaned back in her chair with obvious satisfaction, smirking as she delivered the confession I desperately needed. "The contract's moving forward beautifully under my leadership," she said with obvious pride. "Someone with real vision and competence had to step up and take control, since you are obviously going to be permanently indisposed." I pressed her for more details, keeping my voice carefully casual and conversational while my recorder captured every incriminating word. Her laugh was cold and utterly without empathy as she continued, "It's my contract now, Madison. You were never going to be able to make anything significant happen from a hospital bed, and frankly, the company is much better off with someone competent in charge of such an important project." Back in my temporary apartment, I met with Sarah Chen, a private investigator that Alexander had recommended for her expertise in corporate fraud and family conspiracy cases. She was a woman in her late 30s with a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor, and an impressive track record of uncovering financial crimes that others had missed. "I've been conducting a comprehensive investigation into your sister's recent financial activities," she said, spreading detailed bank statements and transaction records across my dining table like pieces of evidence in a murder case. My breath caught in my throat as she pointed to a series of suspicious payments, large sums of money wired from Victoria's personal account to various recipients over the past several months. "This man," she said, tapping a highlighted name, "Robert Hayes, received $26,000 from your sister's account in multiple installments." I recognized the name immediately. Robert was a colleague who'd always been eager to please Victoria, following her around like a puppy and volunteering for any project she led. Sarah's expression grew even more serious as she continued, "Mr. Hayes has been systematically forging company documents and falsifying project records to make it appear that your sister was the lead developer and creative force behind your algorithm from the very beginning." Later that day, Sophia called me with urgent news, her voice tight with barely controlled anger and disgust. "I found something you absolutely need to see," she said, forwarding me a chain of internal company emails that she'd managed to access through her administrative privileges. I opened them on my laptop, my eyes scanning the screen as my rage built with each successive message. In one particularly damning email, Victoria had written to our department head, "With Madison permanently out of commission, I'm officially stepping in to replace her on all major projects. The $13 million contract is in capable hands now, and I can assure you that the company's interests are my top priority." Another email contained detailed plans for the algorithm's future development, written as if Victoria had conceived every breakthrough and innovation herself, with no mention whatsoever of my years of research and coding. Sophia's voice broke through my thoughts as I read, "She's been systematically planning this takeover for weeks, maybe even months, before your accident. Everyone at work thinks she's some kind of hero, stepping up in a crisis, when really she's just a criminal who tried to murder her own sister for money." I thanked Sophia profusely, my resolve hardening into something unbreakable as I realized these emails were concrete proof of Victoria's premeditated conspiracy to steal my life's work and destroy my professional reputation. Determined to leave absolutely no stone unturned in my investigation, I called the administrative office at Suntec Medical Center to follow up on Dr. Wells' disturbing revelations about my altered medical records. I'd been haunted by her warnings about unauthorized changes to my files, and I needed to understand exactly how deep this conspiracy went and who else might be involved. The hospital administrator, a brisk but helpful woman named Jennifer Martinez, confirmed my worst suspicions after conducting a thorough review of my case file and the computer system access logs. "There's definitely evidence of unauthorized modifications to your medical records," she said, her voice tight with professional concern and legal liability. "Multiple entries were added to exaggerate your condition and prognosis, specifically suggesting that you would be incapacitated for months or possibly permanently disabled." I asked who would have had the administrative access necessary to make such changes, and she hesitated before admitting, "Only a very few staff members have that level of system access. But we're also investigating an external request that came through what appeared to be legitimate legal channels, requesting access to your files for evaluation purposes." My mind immediately flashed to Victoria's extensive professional network and her talent for manipulation and deception. This wasn't just about stealing my contract anymore. This was about creating a false medical narrative that would justify keeping me legally powerless and financially dependent, locked away in a fabricated story of mental incapacity and physical helplessness. With overwhelming evidence of the conspiracy finally assembled, I felt ready to take the fight to court and expose every aspect of Victoria's criminal behavior to the world. With comprehensive evidence finally assembled, I prepared for the legal battle of my lifetime. Sitting across from Alexander in his downtown Phoenix office, surrounded by law books and case files that reached toward the ceiling, I felt a mixture of determination and anxiety about what lay ahead. "We're building an incredibly strong case," he said, his voice steady and confident. "We'll be filing a comprehensive lawsuit in Phoenix Superior Court, charging your sister with fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." I nodded, my fingers tracing the edge of his desk, but my chest tightened as I thought about facing my family in court. The people who'd betrayed me without a second thought or moment of hesitation. Alexander leaned forward, his eyes sharp with legal strategy. "The recording you made at the coffee shop is absolutely crucial to our case," he said. "Arizona is a one-party consent state, which means your conversation with Victoria is completely admissible as evidence in court." I exhaled with relief, knowing that my risky confrontation with her would hold up under legal scrutiny. He explained that we'd present the recording alongside the incriminating emails Sophia had uncovered, demonstrating Victoria's clear intent to steal my $13 million contract and destroy my professional reputation in the process. The day of the trial arrived, and I was as ready as I'd ever be for this moment of reckoning. The Phoenix courthouse buzzed with tension and anticipation as I sat beside Alexander, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to keep them from shaking. He stood with commanding presence, his voice clear and authoritative as he addressed Judge Martinez. "Your Honor, we have undeniable evidence of a comprehensive conspiracy to defraud my client of her intellectual property, her financial assets, and her fundamental legal rights." He began by presenting the damning recording from the coffee shop, where Victoria's own voice had confessed to stealing my contract, her smug words echoing through the courtroom like a confession of guilt. Alexander followed with the forged company documents, showing how Victoria and Robert Hayes had systematically falsified records to claim ownership of my algorithm and erase my contributions to the project. I glanced across the courtroom at Victoria, watching her face grow pale but maintaining her defiant expression even as the evidence mounted against her. Next, Alexander introduced the suspicious bank statements, revealing the payments Victoria had made to Robert, proving their criminal collaboration beyond any reasonable doubt. These financial transactions showed clear evidence of collusion and bribery, he said, his tone unwavering as he handed the judge a comprehensive folder of evidence. Dr. Catherine Wells took the stand next, speaking with calm professional authority that commanded the courtroom's complete attention. The medical records were systematically and deliberately altered to exaggerate Ms. Sterling's condition. She testified, holding up printed charts that showed the unauthorized modifications. False entries were added to suggest permanent brain damage and cognitive impairment, information that was then used to justify the court order freezing her assets and questioning her legal competency. The judge's eyes narrowed with obvious displeasure, and I felt a surge of hope as the truth continued to unravel before everyone's eyes. Victoria stood to defend herself, but her voice was sharp and unsteady, lacking the confidence she'd always projected. "I was protecting the company's interests," she claimed, her eyes darting nervously between the judge and the gallery. Madison was clearly unstable and unfit to handle such a significant project and financial responsibility. Her lies stung deeply, but they crumbled under the weight of overwhelming evidence that painted her as the unstable and dangerous one. Robert Hayes followed her testimony, stammering through a pathetic defense that only made him look more guilty and desperate. When I took the stand to testify on my own behalf, my heart pounded with nervous energy, but my voice remained steady and strong. I spoke passionately about my algorithm, describing the years of dedicated work I'd poured into developing it, and the devastating betrayal of being pushed down the stairs by my own sister. I described the horror of waking up in the hospital, abandoned by my family, and gradually discovering the extent of their conspiracy to strip me of everything I'd worked to achieve. They thought I'd stay silent and accept their abuse, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. But I'm here today to demand justice and reclaim what was stolen from me. The judge deliberated for what felt like an eternity, the minutes stretching into hours of agonizing suspense. Finally, she delivered her verdict with authority that left no room for doubt. "The evidence presented is overwhelming and conclusive," she said, her voice firm and uncompromising. "The defendant orchestrated a calculated, comprehensive scheme to defraud Ms. Sterling of her intellectual property, her financial rights, and her legal autonomy." She sentenced Victoria to 4 years in state prison for fraud, conspiracy, and assault. Robert Hayes received 2 years for his role in forging documents and facilitating the conspiracy. The judge wasn't finished with her pronouncements. "As for the parents," she continued, "their knowing involvement in enabling the scheme and abandoning their daughter in her time of greatest need warrants significant civil penalties." My mother gasped audibly, burying her face in her hands, as the reality of their consequences hit home. My father's shoulders slumped in defeat, his usual authoritarian demeanor completely shattered by public humiliation and legal accountability. With justice finally served, I began the most important chapter of my life, standing in my beautiful new apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Phoenix skyline. I felt a sense of peace and possibility that I'd never experienced before. The walls were still mostly bare, but they represented unlimited potential, a fresh start completely free from the toxic shadows of my family's betrayal and manipulation. I'd made the conscious decision to cut all ties with them permanently, choosing my own mental health and future happiness over any lingering hope for their approval or love. The legal consequences had been severe and far. Victoria was serving her 4-year prison sentence, her ambitious dreams reduced to a concrete cell and orange jumpsuit. The court had ordered her to pay me $260,000 in restitution for the damages she'd caused to my career and reputation. Robert Hayes faced 2 years behind bars and a $26,000 fine for his role in the document forgery conspiracy. My parents, finally held accountable for their complicit silence and emotional abandonment, were hit with a civil judgment requiring them to pay $97,500 in damages. But I wanted to do much more than simply rebuild my own life after this traumatic experience. The pain of betrayal, of being left completely alone in a hospital bed while fighting for my life, had shown me how many other people might be facing similar struggles with toxic family members and financial abuse. I took a bold step forward, investing $650,000 from my contract earnings into establishing the Phoenix Foundation for Familial Abuse Survivors, a comprehensive organization providing legal aid, professional counseling, and safe housing for people escaping toxic family situations. At the foundation's launch event, I spoke to a supportive crowd of survivors, advocates, and legal professionals, my voice steady and strong. "No one should ever feel alone in their fight against family abuse," I said, the words carrying the weight of my own painful journey. "We're here to provide the support system that I wish I'd had during my darkest hours." The foundation represented my way of transforming personal pain into meaningful purpose, ensuring that other survivors would have the resources and support I'd been denied during my own crisis. As I settled into my new home and new life, I spent considerable time reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought me to this point. My family had tried systematically to erase me, Victoria with her elaborate criminal schemes, my parents with their cold indifference and emotional abandonment. But their betrayal had ultimately made me stronger and more self-reliant than I'd ever imagined possible. I'd fought through a medically induced coma, uncovered their comprehensive lies and conspiracy, and faced them down in court with courage I didn't know I possessed. The biggest lesson I learned wasn't about revenge or legal triumph, though those had been satisfying in their own way. It was about the power of self-reliance and the importance of building your own support network of people who genuinely care about your well-being. For years, I desperately sought my family's validation and approval, chasing their love through achievements they consistently ignored or minimized. But in that hospital bed, abandoned and betrayed by the people who should have loved me unconditionally, I discovered something infinitely more valuable: my own unshakable inner strength and determination to succeed on my own terms. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button if this story opened your eyes to toxic family dynamics. Hit the like button if you're rooting for Madison, and share this with someone who needs to hear that they're stronger than their circumstances. Your support helps us bring more real-life stories that matter. What would you have done in Madison's situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into.